You are listening to MCC Votes and Seats, the podcast series of the Center for Political Science of Mathias Corvinus Collegium. We provide election insights with experts and politicians.
Dear listeners, this time we are going to discuss the background, the circumstances, and the possible consequences of the 2025 Romanian presidential election. We are truly privileged to have as a distinguished guest expert Professor Alexandra A. Iancu, Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Bucharest. Dr. Iancu, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for the invite. Glad to be with you.
So, presidential elections were held in Romania in May 2025, where former mathematician and current Bucharest mayor Nicușor Dan and former soccer hooligan and present-day our party leader George Simion were the two candidates who advanced to the second round. The former one won the election and will become the seventh president of Romania. As to address the background, the voting took place after the original 2024 presidential election was cancelled due to suspected foreign involvement, favoring far-right candidate Călin Georgescu, the winner of the first round. Political unrest and a number of demonstrations against the annulment defined the campaign of the Rerun. Alexandra, in your opinion, did the invalidation of the December 2024 election results influence the outcome of the current presidential election? If so, how and to what extent?
The invalidation for certain has had a role to play in the sense in which it consolidated the sovereignistic camp. So those endorsing the Simion's camp actually were motivated to go and vote. By the end of the day, it did not influence the outcome. As you mentioned before, Nicușor Dan won the elections. However, the amount of votes, let's not forget that Simion actually gathered about 5 million votes altogether, which is impressive for a candidate of a small party. That contributed a lot in creating higher levels of polarization and increasing this gap between the two camps. So the invalidation play in this respect, dissatisfaction with the political elite in Bucharest as well. So I would not say that the end result was influenced by the invalidation as such, but for certain what we have seen as final results, the number of votes that has been increased by and the level of mobilization by the fact that we have had this long process of election that started in November basically and up in May.
I understand. So Simion earned around 41% of the vote in the first round and faced Dan, who received 21% of the vote. At the end, Dan won by 53.6% against Simion's 46.4%. The independent Dan begins talks now with the pro-European political groups in Romania's parliament to form a new government. That process could take several weeks, but in the meantime, Romania is in risk of having its sovereign rating downgraded and is subject to an EU excessive deficit procedure and has major market trust difficulties. Do you think that the inauguration of Nicușor Dan can put an end to the years-long political instability in the country?
I believe there is a chance. Already the fact that you have had the pro-European camp winning the elections, it's a good signal, it's a good start. There was a lot of pressure in Bucharest and uncertainty about the future. And nowadays we look towards the creation of a new government. It depends a lot on the configuration of parliament and what the mainstream parties in parliament are going to do, whether they are going to reach an agreement on a broad coalition or not. And from that perspective, you cannot say that the inauguration is the end point of that. But it's a reason to hope for a certain amount of stability or the much needed reforms that have been postponed due to the electoral contest. Let's not forget that in Romania, we also have had elections in June. Basically, we have had the European elections, the local elections, and then by the end of the year, we have had also the parliamentary elections and the overlapping presidential elections, the annulment, and now we are ending an electoral cycle with the presidential elections.
Now I would like to talk a little bit about the party system. In the first round, the governing traditional system parties of Romania, the Social Democratic Party and the National Liberal Party, together with their minor coalition partner, the Democratic Alliance of Hungarians, supported former acting president Crin Antonescu, who came third, I seem to remember, in the first round. While the right-wing sovereignist alliance for the Union of Romanians, AUR, obviously endorsed their party founder and chairman, George Simion. The liberal centrist Save Romania Union's original candidate was Miss Elena Lasconi, the mayor of the Argeș County town Câmpulung, and who came second in the original 2024 presidential elections first round. The party later withdrew its support in favor of Nicușor Dan, but Lasconi remained on the ballot as a USR candidate. The ultra-nationalist SOS Romania did not officially support anybody, while the far-right populist party of young people, POT, the party of Georgescu, endorsed our candidate Simion. And you had the former Social Democratic Prime Minister Victor Ponta as well, who by now has become a Trump-like alt-right TikTok politician. What kind of shifts in party politics do we see in Romania nowadays? Will there be a reorganization, or do you think that the status quo will remain?
SOS actually has had a candidate, Mrs. Șoșoacă, but she was banned by the Constitutional Court to run. That's why they actually have chosen not to endorse someone in the electoral contest. Now, if you're looking a bit what has happened with the presidential election, you are going to see a different pattern from the parliamentary elections as such. So in the parliamentary election, it is true that traditional parties have been eroded. PSD not so much. They were at 29%. They reached 22%. PNL went down half its score from 25% basically to 14%, and that was a major change. And USR stayed at about 13%. It was at 15%. It just downsized to 12%, and that was pulled up by Lasconi's score in the first round of elections last year. The major shift concerned these nationalistic parties. So if you looked at 2019 European elections, there was basically no AUR at that time. Simion ran, it has had a certain amount of votes. He ran as an independent. He was basically an outsider. For the first time, you can see our getting some parliamentary representation, but at 9% in 2020. But from 2020 till 2024, the party just reached double this score. So it's already at 18%, and you have also other parties such as SOS that you quoted at about 7%, almost 8%, and POT, that is a new party endorsing Georgescu, that is at 6%. So all in all, they are at the most 30% in the Romanian parliament. And this is quite unexpected. I mean, we have had throughout the 90s and the beginning of 2000 a party that was a nationalistic radical right party in parliament, but that normalized after 2008. And traditionally, mainstream party just on the left and on the right, they were quarreling, but they were basically centrist parties, pro-European parties, disputing their political power. What has changed nowadays is that you have a certain type of political instability and a sort of decline of the party system of party competition that you haven't had before. So today you have 7 parties in parliament, from 4.5 or 5, it depends how you are measuring them, up to 7 that are disputing, and this high level of fragmentation renders basically impossible to conduct politics as you used to do. And this is quite problematic. So on the one side, you are going to have the presidential elections, of course, that are highly personalized, and the eyes are turned toward the presidential elections. And you have had two independents, Simion, that was but Nicușor Dan, that was endorsed by the pro-European camp. He ran on a ticket as an independent. He hasn't had a party backing, although you can say that he is close to SERE or he's close to center-right political parties. He ran as lacking political affiliation as such. And on the other side, you still have the same parliament that we've elected basically in December, and it is basically split. You are going to have a pro-European camp that seems to be a majority camp, but is going to mingle left-leaning, right-leaning positions and different interests and different parties, and then a sovereignistic camp. And this is going to be very difficult to manage. Now, are political parties going to change? There is an ongoing debate of a need of a radical reform of traditional parties. And political parties, basically the mainstream political parties, have seen the result or interpreted the results in the presidential elections in particular as a sort of no confidence vote in traditional politics and the way in which political parties are functioning. So there is this balance to be maintained between the need of continuity and trying to strengthen the parliamentary majority and being efficient on the background of what you've described earlier, namely economic instability, pressures to reform the various policy areas on one side, and the need to reform party politics in general and boost the level of confidence in traditional parties.
Formerly, the case was that Transylvanian regions primarily supported the conservative liberal PNL party, while the Social Democrats were strong mostly in the southern and eastern regions of the country, mostly, I'm saying and stressing this. And the cities voted for liberal centrist candidates, while rural areas were in favor of the two traditional system parties. And of course, the ethnic Hungarians normally disciplinedly vote for UDMR, the ethnic Hungarian party. Romanians abroad and in rural areas, smaller towns, and young voters, especially men, tend to vote for anti-system parties like AUR-POT or SOS Romania. Has anything changed in this regard? What can be said about the voting preferences of the different layers of the society based on the May 2025 results?
That is no longer a regional divide, in the sense in which you are going to have larger towns that are going to vote pro-European, let's say, for Nicușor Dan in general, whereas rural communities, smaller towns are going to vote sovereignistic in nature, and this divide is quite obvious. So you no longer have only Cluj or the western part of the country voting center-right and Bucharest as well. Traditionally, Bucharest votes center-right, but you are going to have some counties in Moldova that have higher levels of development and larger cities. So somehow there is a divide, but there is an economic divide. It's mostly referring, for instance, to university centers or richer towns that are going to vote center-right, whereas in the rural areas you are going to find a majority of people voting for AUR, that's for sure. In what concerns Romania diaspora, the Romanian diaspora has always voted somehow anti-establishment. Recently, and this was a bit unexpected, but if you are going back to 2018, the referendum for traditional family, you have seen a sort of radicalization of voting patterns in the Romanian diaspora. So it was a big shock in Romania to see the high levels of voting for a sovereignistic radical right party in recent elections. What has happened with the second round is that you have had basically higher levels of mobilization. So you have had this quiet diaspora that usually doesn't go to vote, that mobilize somehow to counter this way of nationalistic vote in the Romanian diaspora. So it did not break even, but still you have some level of balance in the vote as compared to the first round of elections. So there is a sort of an electoral geography right now, but it's not necessarily a regional electoral geography. Yes, you have some traditional constituencies that tend to vote with, let's say, center-right parties, but you see clearly the economic divide that has been formed in the articulation of votes. So I would say that basically you can actually run analysis on the development indicators, or basically all that is referring to budgets or investments in various regions, and you are going to find a correlation with voting patterns. The main divide remains one between larger cities, basically, and rural areas.
Talking about voting patterns, without the votes of Romania's ethnic Hungarians and Moldovans with dual Moldovan Romanian citizenship, Nicușor Dan might not have been elected president of Romania. Conservative estimates suggest that over 500,000, maybe over 700,000 of these individuals voted for Dan, accounting for a sizable percentage of his around 830,000 vote advantage over his opponent Simion. What factors might have affected the voting preference of ethnic Hungarians and Moldovan Romanian voters? And will there be any political gesture towards these electoral groups from the Cotroceni Palace during Dan's tenure?
I believe there are different situations, but it's true that the electoral difference was made basically by the mobilization of the ethnic Hungarians voting in Romania and the citizens of Moldova that also have the Romanian citizenship, but for different reasons and in different ways. In the case of the vote in Moldova, it is clear that you are going to have students, in particular, most of them are students, but also people that have dual citizenship. Moldova is looking towards the European integration, so you are going to find particularly citizens that are endorsing the European ideal and want various forms of cooperation with Romania, and I believe that Nicușor Dan already went to see Maia Sandu after the election, and there are narrow forms of cooperation between Romania and the Republic of Moldova. So this is going to continue, and Romania always announced its endorsement towards the integration of Moldova in the European Union. So this is not necessarily new. Now, in the case of the voting patterns in the Hungarian communities in Romania, UDMR, basically, which is the party, the Union of Democratic Hungarians of Romania, is a party that has a long tradition, basically, in being part of the government, and it's a very good example of moderation in politics. Romanian politics is usually highly unstable. There are numerous conflicts, but there is a sort of solidarity and a sort of a good partnership with UDMR as a member of the government, as a member of the political system in general, and parties from the left or right collaborated with UDMR. Traditionally, UDMR is perceived as a party that is keeping its word somehow. So there is a solid partner defending the interest of the community. In this particular case, Auri was and is a highly nationalistic party, but is a highly nationalistic party different from many others, because there are many in Europe, in the sense in which it recreates somehow the discourse of the socialist nationalists. So it is a highly radical ethnicist view on society. So aside from the political mobilization or the fact that there are good forms of cooperation between political cooperation with UDMR, there is a sort of a discourse that creates worries or creates a sort of rejection, not only from the pro-European in general communities, but also in what concerns this tendency to overemphasize the ethnicist, nationalistic discourse that is non-inclusive, that is rejecting any form of community building than the one that is strictly defined in a very nativist way. So it was a rational vote from the Hungarian community as well. So it wasn't just a construction, just rally for Nicușor Dan. It's a way of basically seeing that your interest, and not the immediate interest, but long-term interest as a part of European community, part of the Romanian society, is to preserve, however, a pro-European direction from that matter. And UDMR is going most probably be a member of the next coalition in government, and I'm pretty sure that the interests of the Hungarian community are going to be taken into account. But I believe that this vote, I mean, it was a sort of an existential vote. Going back to what I was telling you about earlier, if you are looking at radical right parties in Europe, usually you have either parties that started out as mainstream and radicalized, or you have newer parties that emerge. In the Romanian case, what was particularly striking was that you have started with this small faction that overnight became like a mainstream party, not by rhetorics or programmatic proposals, but by electoral backing. So you do not know very well who are the leaders, who are the representatives, what they are going to do, what you are listening to. These are programmatic proposals that are coming from people that are not necessarily having decisional know-how, and there is a sort of a lack of transparency of their trajectories, founding, so on and so forth. So this is quite difficult to manage.
When it comes to political campaigns and political communication, did you see any shifts in communication patterns, any novelties this time? You know, Călin Georgescu's victory in the first round of the annulled election was in major part supported by his extensive presence on TikTok and social media platforms. Did other politicians, other presidential candidates try to copy Georgescu's example?
Yes, they did. But the problem is that, I mean, going back to the annulment of the elections, I believe that there are many questions that were left unanswered. I mean, if you are looking at Călin Georgescu, he started out the electoral campaign, the official electoral campaign. He wasn't basically taken into consideration in the polls, so you haven't had surveys, because he was at about, I don't know, 2%, 1%, so in the margins of basically all sorts of investigations. So no one was looking at Călin Georgescu. And it's true that you can have these sort of electoral campaigns that are going under the radar. But usually, I mean, in social sciences, at least so far, you haven't had an explanation for reaching 20 and so percent, 22 in his case, in 2 weeks. No matter the exposure, let's say that you have this genius electoral campaign that is all of a sudden broadcasted through TikTok, so it goes under the radar. But usually you don't have behavior that is going to follow various, I don't know, videos online and will massify in order to get the first place in the first round of the presidential elections. I'm not sure that it is only TikTok or the manipulation of algorithms that allowed candidates to go from, I don't know, 2%, let's assume that there were this 2% to begin with, and became like the person that reached in 2 weeks 23%. You can say it's the Romanian society, lack of political culture or lack of party stability, so electoral volatility is high. And I believe that this is also illustrative when you are looking at other candidates that try actually to mimic somehow the TikTok campaign. It doesn't work. I mean, if you don't have the instruments to replicate or to endorse this sort of a reach, it doesn't work if you are having social media campaigning. Yeah. That being said, our traditionally has had a social media presence, so they tend to rely on social media, Facebook, live broadcasting of different events, grassroots movements that are then broadcasted through different channels. So this is typical for our in general. Traditional parties are using this less to a lesser extent, but they are still having some online presence. And if you are looking at budgets, so the financial allocation in terms of electoral campaigning, you'll see that starting with 2016 already, there were large amounts of money invested in this. So yeah, I believe that social media presence was important. I mean, Călin Georgescu, I found about Călin Georgescu not by looking at TV, but the taxi drivers who were speaking about Călin Georgescu. I mean, he was really under the radar even during the electoral campaign.
Thank you. I know it is a delicate issue and it is very hard to measure in academic terms. However, in Romania, they say that the church, the Romanian Orthodox Church, has a quite considerable political weight, similarly to the different secret services. If these allegations are true, how do you see the future of their power in politics, with special regards to the political party landscape?
I mean, the Orthodox Church, the institutional Orthodox Church, is not as present as indicated in the literature. So if you are looking at the public declaration of the church, they stay outside of the spectrum of the political spectrum. What you can see are mostly politicians that are visiting churches during the electoral campaign in order to profile themselves as being strong believers, so more or less. So you are going to see that. And in terms of lobby for policymaking, again, these are quite marginal. Usually, if there is an exchange, it concerns traditionally some money for the churches from that perspective. Nevertheless, you are going to have a community of priests that are more politically engaged, irrespective of the official position of the church. And there are studies that are suggesting that some of them are mostly inclined towards the nationalistic camp, so they are more radical, more conservative in their proposals. And then you are going to find a third layer, and these are non-institutionalized, mostly Orthodox blogs or different other communities that are defining themselves as religious community. And these are quite radical. Most of them, 90% of them, are quite radical in nature, and they tend to endorse even pro-Russian positions in their interpretation of and very strict canonical interpretation of the church and so on and so forth. So, and they are quite active from a political standpoint, but there are numerous in nature. It's just not you would find them. You would have a huge blog that is going to activate as such. You are going to have numerous smaller communities that are quite radicalized, so very difficult to map out and to point a finger to them. So I believe that from that perspective, the church as such, the Orthodox Church, because you would have many other confessions, but smaller one, has an issue even with the coordination of, let's say, its own loyalists or the members of the church in general, and various communities that are actually using the label of Orthodox in order to activate also in the social but also in the political field. So there are allegations and there are rumors, there are even statements that priests, for instance, use their sermons in order to suggest to whom the electorate should vote for, so in church. So there are these sort of stories, but it's not a coordinated policy of the Orthodox Church. And I believe that would reveal rather the weakness of the church as an institution as such, rather than the strength. So I would say that it's rather a crisis of the Orthodox Church rather than this powerful institution that can actually lobby or put pressure on politics in general. Now, in principle, secret services. So there are two issues. The first one is the massive failure of our intelligence services, in what concerns the direct involvement of some factions of the secret services in politics in general, or backing some of the movement, we simply do not know. I mean, to what extent there is a sort of a narrative, sort of a Romanian obsession with secret services and secret services involvement in politics, or having undercover agents in various parties. Basically, we have no information. So it's like the rhetoric of a deep state. I'm not saying that you don't have the involvement. I'm saying that you cannot measure that and you have no idea what is the reach, whether they are present, what kind of secret services or intelligence services, to what extent. What we're knowing is that basically the budget is skyrocketing in terms from one year to the next, but that's about all. You don't know how they are working basically and what is their degree of involvement. You have only the narrative or the perception of high levels of involvement, but with no particular analysis. What I can tell you is that there is an obsession. I mean, there is a political narrative about the involvement. There is a sort of societal obsession with the presence of secret services that are a sort of a mantra, where you can see, you are going to see an explanation in terms of intelligence services. But what are the mechanisms? What is the involvement? What is the size of the involvement, the dimension of such involvement, if there is one? That these are questions to be answered. I believe that what you can ask are the specific questions referring, for instance, to the events of the elections. Why you would have not five intelligence services, but five services that were supposed to secure the elections that failed.
Yeah, and I am sorry, Alexandra, I didn't mean to put you in an embarrassing situation by asking this question. I know that due to the lack of official information, it is very difficult to claim anything for sure. You know, I was just curious because these affiliations were the major causes, the major triggers that led to the organization of a rerun of the December 2024 presidential ballot. Now, to conclude this amazing conversation, Alexandra, personally, what did you find the most interesting about the May 2025 presidential election?
The fact that you have had this huge amount of public mobilization. I mean, if you're looking at the Romanian political culture, is a high level of erosion of trust in government, trust in politicians, trust in political parties. We have had this very long experience of somehow looking at candidates as being not necessarily good for democracy. You have to vote for because you have to choose, but not a level of enthusiasm. And I was pretty ready to bet on the fact that you are not going to have another presidential race or whatever race you can imagine where you would have enthusiasm or sort of a clear community backing that would actually give you some level of hope. So that was unexpected to see that you are going to have about 65% of the electorate going the polls and then celebrating an elections. Yes, it's a difficult period. You do not know what the long-term outcome is going to be, but that level of enthusiasm was quite surprising to see that there are some sort of you still have the resources after a very difficult period in terms of governing, that you have still the resources for hope, political hope. I believe that is good for a society.
That was a wonderful ending remark for our podcast, a very positive one. Professor Alexandra A. Iancu, we are rather grateful for your most memorable and thoughtful insights into contemporary Romanian politics. Your most appreciated views and information were no doubt very helpful in better understanding the background and the circumstances of the May 2025 rerun of the presidential election. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your invite.
My name is Bálint Tóth. On behalf of my colleagues, I thank you for your kind attention, and I invite you to check out our upcoming episodes as well. Take care. Goodbye.